Hey guys, this is Paul, and this is another Game Dev Paradise, a video game show about making video games or something. Rambling. All right, so the last video, or the first video that I've made on Game Dev Paradise, talked about what is programming, and I watched that video and I thought to myself that there was a few other things I wanted to showcase to explain um, for a certain person. So let's say you're a student, you're in high school or grade school or whatever, or college, or maybe you dropped out and you went back, or maybe you're planning on a different career and you're considering programming or something to do with programming, or you're in the IT field and considering taking a class on programming, or in high school and taking a class on programming. So I kind of want to give you a glimpse at what that is at a sort of a more advanced level in a way, and have you sort of give you an overview. So maybe you're thinking about a career in programming. I want to show you kind of what you would be doing as a programmer, whether it would be making games or making apps or just using programming to help you. So this is what is programming part 2. All right, so where you would begin is, let's say you're already a programmer, you went through school, you studied programming, either at this point it's a hobby or it's a job, at some point you would use a compiler, which I showed in the first video. This is Microsoft Visual Studio. It's a compiler done by Microsoft. Back in my day, when I was in high school, it was a different compiler called Borland, C++, I believe. But tools tend to evolve and change, and different companies come and go. Microsoft's a pretty big player, I believe, in Visual Studio. This is a paid application. This is the professional version, I believe. You can get the Express version for free to try out, to experiment on, to things like that. So Microsoft and many of these tools are great in such a way that you can get a more limited version that's free to experiment on. In fact, the free version would probably be fine for me, except that because I'm making a commercial application, something I sell, I don't think the free version's license allows for that. So I decided to be legit and buy this software a few years ago. All right, so when you open up a compiler, if you're a programmer, you would probably open up a project. So let's open up Void Destroyer, my first game. And here, using the compiler, this might look like really mysterious. Let me actually zoom in a little bit. This might look really mysterious, really hard to understand, and a lot of times new things appear this way. But as everything, once you get to some experience, some trial and error, some learning, some school potentially, or on your own, all this stuff is not as difficult as it might seem initially. I remember when I was a kid, just imagining working for a living for somebody else just seemed really weird. And of course now it's just like the most mundane thing, right? So if you're sort of new to programming and you're thinking like, oh my God, it's like sorcery, it's really not, It can be. Um, it can be really complex, really crazy. It can be like magic and sorcery, or it can be just really, really simple, very, very simple stuff. It's kind of up to you, kind of what you want to do with it. All right, so we're in the compiler here. I'm just going to go through a little bit, kind of what it looks like. Now, I'm going to get into a different topic later on, how to learn programming. And it kind of touches on this a little bit. But basically, in a bigger project, you're going to be working with multiple files. Here I have multiple files here of code. For example, this one handles the afterburner. This one handles the cargo bay. I have a bunch of ones for ship AI, including some formations. So the reason for this is you're basically organizing. You're organizing your files, and in a sense, you're organizing the way that your code and your entire game or whatever application you're working on is structured. So you could technically have everything in one single file, but these files are already pretty big. This is my command ship file. Let's see, what does this file deal with? It deals with upgrades. Actually, this is from part 1. Excuse me. I had to remind myself this is from part 1, which works a little different than part 2. So this deals with active abilities and upgrading the command ship. It's quite large. That's just one file. So if you look at these other files, some of them are large, some of them are pretty small, like pilot names. Pretty small file. This file just gets a random pilot name from which are the guys from Kickstarter, that guys and gals that backed me on Kickstarter that elected to have their names in here. So some files are very small, some files are medium, some files are huge, but because they're organized in this way, you can sort of get a grip on things. Also, if I was working at a company or working at a little larger studio, or if I had a team of programmers, potentially one programmer would be working on one file or one aspect organized in such a way, another one would be working on a different aspect. There's tools to combine code and see the differences and see backups and things like that. There's all these kinds of real good tools for collaboration. But it's also not just for sort of organizing and keeping things separate, but also for how the structure is laid out as well. So here, for example, we have a file for asteroid bases. And then we have all this code for asteroid bases. And the asteroid bases are made up of physical objects as well as this base type code. Some of this is kind of my early coding, so I might have done things a lot different now. So just kind of keep that in mind as you grow as a coder. You tend to you tend to do things a little bit different, a little bit better, or sometimes worse, but generally better. So I probably wouldn't have this anymore. I probably would have done it a different way. Not that it really matters, it's kind of me rambling. But here, an asteroid base is also a physical object, which is sort of this smaller, more general type of object. For example, a ship can be a physical object, a missile can be a physical object, an asteroid. It's sort of organizing and sectioning off the code for you to sort of, as a programmer, to get a better handle on. So, for a computer, when you generate this executable file, the end result, whatever, or other files, the computer doesn't care that this is called setup entity tune edge color, but you as the programmer, you do care. So you have this, you kind of work with these files like this. And it was kind of a learning process for me as a programmer to understand why you would need this. And actually, I'll touch on this in my How to Learn Programming video, or better stated, How I Learned Programming video, about where that plays into it. So some of these things you kind of go into as you progress. All right, so let's take a look at some code, and this one's pretty simple. So this one might be some simple, just kind of an example of the actual coding. So when you see this, pilot names, generate pilot names, name, pilot name, these things, some of this is stuff that I, as a programmer, have control of, and some of these things are that might come from different sources. So this right here, this is entirely something that I came up with in the terms of names. Now, as a coder, this is perfectly valid. Naming something this or naming something this, perfectly valid. So it's really up to the coder to decide how they're going to name things, what the name is. The computer doesn't care. So this is totally up to you as a coder. Having said that, having said this is totally up for you, there's standards that some companies might be really strict about. I think there's one made by Google. Google coding standards. Um, you can kind of look them up. I think it's pretty interesting. So here's Google C++ style guide, and there's going to be quite a lot of info here. So some companies have pretty some companies where you might work might have really strict guidelines like that. How you code, how you name things, how you use variables, um, and some just might be totally lax, depending maybe on their size, depending on their needs, depending if you're just like a one let's say IT guy that might some do coding on the side, then the company might not have any coding standards, just whatever ones you want to personally follow. Or if you're working at Google, then they might be pretty strict with their coding standards, having written that guide. So yeah, a lot of this is up to you as a coder, and as for example myself, I try to write code that you can almost read, that's almost human readable. Like this is pilot names, it handles pilot names. Now to some people, this might be vague, even having pilot names, which is kind of simple to me and easy to understand. Some people might not know exactly what this does, um, but all that matters is that I know. So the way I do my code is the way that I expect it to do it. So I do it for myself, basically, not for anybody else. So here, when I call something generate pilot names, I know exactly what that means. And even though I haven't been in this piece of code for maybe even a year or more, maybe even 2 years, I can just skim it really fast and know what it does. So that's kind of what it looks like. I'm trying to really demystify coding for somebody that might be just a really early beginner to it, or even just thinking about it maybe as a career. So coding, like I said, can be very simple. You tend to create variables. This is a variable called x. For some reason, we use like x all the time. It's of type int, which stands for integer, equals 0. So it's already initialized to the value of 0. If you do something like this, the compiler will actually tell you that this is an error because you have two variables of the same name. So the compiler will tell you and will kind of give you warnings and errors. So I'm just going to call it integer y. And here, if you notice, I didn't initialize it to something. So this means that this number could be anything, which could create a lot of issues if you're expecting this number to start at 0. If you make an oversight here, this could be a pretty serious bug. So coding, like I said, can be very simple, or can be very complex. I think personally, I try to keep things very simple. I try to not to repeat code as much as I can. I try to reuse code as much as I can. That might be kind of a vague statement to somebody new. They might not really understand it, but coding, is sort of just can be as simple as this. There's also like conditions like if x is equal to 0, y is equals to x plus 1. This is a basic if-then statement. By itself, this has really no meaning, right? I mean, look, x and y. what does this do? But if player health is equals to 0, or maybe if what can I come up with? if player health is less than 0, then player lives is equal to player lives minus 1. Right? So this makes a lot more health, right? A lot more sense. So if player health is less than 0, so if player is at negative health, that means the player died, right, or took more damage. Then take player lives, which is current in the beginning is 3, and subtract 1 from it. So at the end, player lives is equal to 2. So, you know, having int x, int y is just very, very vague and confusing, but having player health, player lives, a lot more clear, a lot more understanding. Hopefully that made sense. So then, when you do some changes to your code, you hit this sort of a play button, and this compiles the code and it generates a file. In my case, it's an executable file called Void Destroyer 2. So we're back to Void Destroyer 2 just because it's a little simpler. So this generates this file, which then you can run, or I can run, or whoever can run to test the app, test the application if it's running, if it's buggy, or to change or whatever. So that's kind of the basics of what a programmer does. Now keep in mind, there's tons of different programming. There's tons of different applications for programming. Sometimes you're creating components of a program. These DLL files. For example, Void Destroyer uses this particle universe.dll. That's for all the particle effects, which are like the explosions. There's also Ogre OGG sound, which handles all the sound and music. So sometimes you're creating components that go into other things. Sometimes you're working on a game or a business application, a database application. Sometimes you're working on an application that connects to a database or something on the web. There's all kinds of various applications. Okay, so just to demonstrate a different type of an application, this is not in C++. This was like looks like this was something I did to have a launcher for the demo just to say it's out of date. I think I did an update on Steam to just remove the demo for Void Destroyer 2. But this is a little different type of an application where you can actually create GUIs pretty easily. So here, if I go to the toolbox, view toolbox, I can create, let's see, what can I create? Common controls, button. I can add a new button here. I can set its properties. The properties, all kinds of properties. Like I said, remember guys, I said programming is manipulating data. Hello button. You know, this property is now hello button. That's what it says there, right? Let me see if this will even run. Yeah, looks like it run. And see, I created a button, but when I click it, nothing happens. Well, it's not just a matter of drawing a button. You actually have to code what happens when you click a button. So in this particular type of an application, when I double click on this hello button, I have an event that happens when you click a button. So I'm just gonna do it easy on myself. I'm just gonna make the application exit, and here I'm gonna say, I'm gonna change this from hello button to another exit button. So this piece of code, application.exit, tells this piece of application to close. So here I hit the run. Now I can test it, and voila, it works, right? So there's all kinds of different apps. Some are um, for banking, for customer service, for point of sale, where, like when you go to a grocery store and those guys like scan items. Some are just like informational, all kinds of different apps in all kinds of languages. Like this is, I believe, C sharp. I think this is another language. I'm pretty sure either that or Visual Basic. I forget. And there's quite a lot of tools, like I said, quite a lot of help for programmers with these compilers. For example, let's say I'm working on something and I get these tool tips, so I can see what's in ship. All these things are in ship at speed 100, right? So or there's all these little helpers to kind of like help you out. What is it? Oh, I know. There we go. There we go. So there's all these helps. As you saw, I was kind of struggling there, but I get another line that I know, hey, I'm missing something. I typed in a string. I'm like, hey, I'm missing something again. So there's quite a lot of tools to help you. You don't have to be a genius and remember every single thing. That comes with experience. Using your tools is a big, big component of learning how to program. All right, let me try to think. So a lot of different types of programming, and some things that people don't even consider programming. If we go to HTML, if you're familiar with that, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and some people don't consider HTML a programming language. It doesn't matter to me if it is or it isn't. I'm not here to like change or not, but it kind of looks like code, so you can kind of consider it programming. It's more, it might be a nice little beginning step for somebody to kind of get into it. But there's also like SQL, depends how you say it. It's a structured query language. Select everything from customers. Customers is a database. SQL is this sort of language for querying databases. So as a programmer, you might know one or two, you might know just one, you might know quite a lot more. There's C sharp, there's Java. Different people have different feelings and opinions on programming languages. And it's okay. That's perfectly fine. We all have our preferences. Certain languages are better at certain things. Certain languages give you more control. For example, C++ lets you break things. It doesn't really let you break things, but it does what you tell it to do. And if you tell it to do something incorrect, it'll do it. So it can potentially crash the game, crash the computer, things like that. Java, whereas Java might be a lot more strict with that, or HTML would be like close to very hard to crash the computer. It would just give you a weird looking website probably. So there's quite a lot of programming languages, quite a lot of different tools. You might look at a job listing and they're like, oh, I need this much experience with this tool, and you never heard of it, and that's okay. Well, maybe that company just uses that tool and you use another tool. If it's not a huge industry standard tool, it might be perfectly fine that you didn't come across it. Or they use a certain language. Well, maybe it might be like an in-house language, or it might be a language that's used by the business application that somebody just invented for that business application. It's a pretty wide world. So my goal here in this video is to encourage somebody to try to learn programming as a hobby or as a profession or as whatever. if I discouraged you from it, that's not my intention. If I did, then forget everything I said and try something else. Try some other video. If I encouraged you, yeah, take a look around. Maybe I'll post another video in the future that might help you get kind of started some more, or another little tidbit. Definitely leave me feedback, comments, questions, things like that. I'm totally open to that. The next video should be how to learn programming, or better stated, how I learned programming. And after that, we might go into more type of videos about games. So yeah, these topics are really, they can be really in depth. I hope I gave you a little tiny tidbit of it, to hopefully encourage you potentially to find more info. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope I see you guys again on what is it? Game Dev Paradise.